Welcome back, amigos. This is part 3 of The Mark of Zorro by Johnston McCulley. Vamonos. With Captain Ramon still hammering at the front door, the despensero hurried to open it. "I regret that Don Diego is not home, senor," he said. "He has gone to his hacienda." "I know as much. Don Carlos and his wife and daughter are here, are they not?" "Don Carlos and his wife are out on a visit this evening, senor." "And the senorita?" "Well, she is here, of course." "In that case, I shall pay my respects to the senorita," Captain Ramon said. "Senor, perdóname, but the little lady is alone." "I am not a proper man?" the captain demanded. It is scarcely right for her to receive the visit of a gentleman when her dueña is not present." "Who are you to speak of me of proprieties?" Captain Ramon demanded. "Out of my way, scum. Cross me and you shall be punished. I know things concerning you." The face of the despensero went white at that, for the captain spoke the truth, and at a word could cause him considerable trouble and mayhap, and possibly a term in the carcel. Yet he knew what was right. "But, senor," he protested. Captain Ramon thrust him aside with his left arm and stalked into the big living room. Lolita sprang up in alarm when she saw him standing before her. "Ah, senorita, I trust I did not startle you," he said. "I regret your parents are absent, yet I must have a few words with you. This servant would deny my entrance, but I imagine you have naught to fear from a man with one wounded arm." It is scarcely proper, is it not, senor?" the girl asked, a little bit frightened. "I feel sure no harm can come of it," he said. He went across the room and sat down on one end of the couch and admired her beauty frankly. The despensero hovered nearby. "Go to the kitchen, fellow," Captain Ramon commanded. "No, allow him to remain," Lolita begged. "My father commanded it, and he courts trouble if he leaves." "And if he remains, go, fellow." The servant left. Captain Ramon turned toward the girl again and smiled upon her. He flattered himself that he knew women. They loved to see a man show mastery over them. "More beautiful than ever, senorita," he said in a purring voice. "I'm really glad to find you thus alone, for there's something I would say to you." "What can that be, senor?" "Last night at your father's hacienda I asked his permission to pay my addresses to you. Your beauty has inflamed my heart, senorita, and I would have you for my wife. Your father consented, except he said that Don Diego Vega has also received permission, so it appears that it lies between Don Diego and myself." "Should you speak of it, senor?" she asked. "Certainly Don Diego Vega is not the man for you," he went on. Has he courage? Has he spirit? Is he not a laughing-stock because of his weakness?" "You speak ill of him in his own house," the senorita asked, her eyes flashing. "I speak the truth, senorita. I would have your favor. Can you not look upon me with kindness? Can you not give me hope that I may win your heart and hand?" "Captain Ramon, all this unworthy," she said. "It's not proper manner, and you know it. I beg you leave now." "I wait for your answer, senorita." Her outraged pride rose up at that. Why could she not be wooed as other senoritas in the proper fashion? Why was this man so bold in his words? Why did he disregard the conventions? "You must leave me," she said firmly. "This is all wrong, and you're aware of it." "Would you make my name a byword, Captain Ramon? Suppose somebody was to come and find us like this alone." "Nobody will come, senorita. Can you not give me an answer?" "No," she cried, starting to get to her feet. "It is not right that you should ask it. My father, I assure you, shall hear of this visit. Your father, he sneered. A man who has the ill will of the governor. A man is being plucked because he possessed no political sense. I fear not your father. He should be proud of the fact that Captain Ramon looks at his daughter. Senor. Do not run away, he said, clutching her hand. I have done you the honor to ask you to be my wife. Done me the honor, she cried angrily, almost in tears. It is the man who is done the honor when a woman accepts him. I like you when you rage, he observed. Sit down beside me here, and now give me your answer. Senor. You'll wed me, of course. I shall intercede with the governor for your father and get a part of his estate restored. I shall take you to San Francisco de Asís, to the governor's house, where you will be admired by persons of rank. Senor, let me go. My answer, senorita. You have held me off enough. She wrenched away from him, confronted him with blazing eyes, her tiny hands clenched at her sides. Wed with you, she cried. Rather would I remain a maid all my life, rather would I with a native, rather than I would die than wed with you. I wed a caballero, a gentleman, or no man, and I cannot say that you are such. Pretty words from the daughter of a man who is about ruined. Ruin would not change the blood of the Pulidos, senor. I doubt whether you understand that, evidently having ill blood yourself. Don Diego shall hear of this. He is my father's friend. And you would wed the rich Don Diego, and straighten out your father's affairs? You would not wed an honorable soldier, but would sell yourself? Senor, she yelled. This was beyond endurance. She was alone. There was nobody near to resent the insult, so her blood called upon her to avenge it herself. Like a flash of lightning, her hand went forward and came against Captain Ramon's cheek with a crack. Then she sprang backward, but he grasped her by the arm and drew her toward him. I shall take a kiss to pay for that, he said. Such a tiny bit of womanhood can be handled with one arm. Thank the saints. She fought him, striking and scratching at his breast, for she could not reach his face, but he only laughed at her and held her tighter until she was almost spent and breathless. And finally he threw back her head and looked down into her eyes. A kiss in payment, senorita, he said. It will be a pleasure to tame such a wild one. She tried to fight again, but could not. She called upon the saints to aid her, and Captain Ramon laughed more and bent his head, and his lips came close to hers. But he never claimed the kiss. She started to wrench away from him again, and he was forced to strengthen his arm and pull her forward. And from the corner of the room there came a voice that was at once deep and stern. One moment, senor, it said. Captain Ramon released the girl and whirled on the heel. He blinked his eyes to pierce the gloom of the corner. He heard Senorita Lolita give a glad cry. Then Captain Ramon, disregarding the presence of the lady, cursed once and loudly, for Senor Zorro stood before him. He did not pretend to know how the highwayman had entered the house. He did not stop to think of it. He realized that he was without a blade at his side, and that he could not use it had he one, because of his wounded shoulder, and Zorro was walking toward him from the corner. Outlaw I may be, but I respect women, the curse of Capistrano said. And you, an officer of the army, do not, it appears. What are you doing here, Captain Ramon? And what do you hear? I heard a lady scream, which is warrant enough for a caballero to enter any place, senor. It appears to me that you have broken all conventions. Perhaps the lady has broken them also. Senor, roared the highwayman, another thought like that, and I'll cut you down where you stand. Though you are a wounded man, how shall I punish you? Dispensero, natives, the captain shouted loudly. Here's Senor Zorro, a reward if you take him. The masked man laughed. 'Twill do you small good to call for help, he said. Spend your breath in saying your prayers, rather. You do well to threaten a wounded man. You deserve death, senor, but I suppose I must allow you to escape that. But you go down upon your knees and apologize to this senorita, and then you will go from this house, slink from it like the cur that you are, and keep your mouth closed regarding what has transpired here. If you do not, I promise to soil my blade with your life's blood. Ha! On your knees, senor. And instantly, Senor Zorro commanded. I have no time to waste in waiting. I'm an officer. On your knees, commanded Senor Zorro again in a terrible voice. He sprang forward and grasped Captain Ramon by his well shoulder and threw him to the floor. Quickly, Putron. Tell the senorita that you humbly beg her pardon, which she will not grant, of course, since you are beneath speaking to, and that you will not annoy her again. Say it, or by the saints you have made your last speech. Captain Ramon said it, and then Senor Zorro grasped him by the neck and lifted him and propelled him to the door and hurled him into the darkness. And had his boots not been soft, Captain Ramon would have been injured more deeply, both in feelings and anatomy. Senor Zorro closed the door as the despensero came running into the room to stare in fright at the masked man. Senorita, I trust that I have been of service, the highwayman said. The scoundrel will not bother you further, else he feels the sting of my blade again. Oh, thank you, senor, thank you, she cried. I shall tell my father this good deed you have done. Despensero, get him wine. There was naught for the butler to do except obey, since she had voiced the order, and he hurried from the room, pondering on the times and manners. Senorita Lolita stepped to the man's side. Senor, she breathed, you saved me from insult. You saved me from the pollution of that man's lips. Senor, though you deem unmaidenly, I offer you freely the kiss he would have taken. She put up her face and closed her eyes. And I shall not look when you raise your mask, she said. It were too much, senorita, he said. Your hand, but not your lips. You shame me, senor. I was bold to offer it, and you have refused. You shall feel no shame, he said. He bent swiftly, raised the bottom of his mask, and touched lightly her lips with his. Ah, senorita, he said, I would I were an honest man and would claim you openly. My heart is filled with love of you, and mine with love of you. This is madness, none must know. I would not fear to tell the world, senor. Your father and his fortunes, Don Diego. I love you, senor. Your chance to be a great lady. Do you think I did not know Don Diego was the man you meant when we spoke on your father's patio? This is a whim, senorita. It is love, senor, whether anything comes of it or not, and a pulido does not love twice. What possibly could come of it but distress? We shall see. God is good. It is madness, sweet madness, senor. He clasped her to him and bent his head again, and again she closed her eyes and took his kiss. Only this time the kiss was longer. She made no effort to see his face. I may be ugly, he said, but I love you. Disfigured, senorita, still I love you. What hope can we have? Go, senor, before my parents return. I shall say nothing except that you saved me from insult and went your way again. They will think that you came to rob Don Diego and turn honest. Senor, for my sake, turn honest, I say, and claim me. No man knows your face, and if you take off your mask forever, none will ever know your guilt. It is not as if you were an ordinary thief, I know why you have stolen, to avenge the helpless, to punish cruel politicians, and to aid the oppressed. I know that you have given what you've stolen to the poor. Oh, senor. But my task is not yet done, senorita, and I feel called upon to finish it. Then finish it, and may the saints guard you, as I feel sure they will, and when it's finished, come back to me. I shall know you in whatever garb you come. Nor shall I wait that long, senorita. I shall see you often. Could not exist elsewise. Guard yourself. I shall in truth now, since I have double reason. Life never so sweet as now. He backed away from her slowly and turned and glanced toward the window near at hand. I must go, he said. I cannot wait for wine. That was but a subterfuge, so that we could be alone, she confessed. Until the next time, senorita, and may it not be long. En garde, senor. Always, loved one. Senorita, adios. Again their eyes met, and he waved his hand at her, gathered his cloak close about his body, and darted to the window and went through it. The darkness outside swallowed him. Picking himself out of the dust before Don Diego Vega's door, Captain Ramon darted through the darkness to the footpath that ran up the slope toward the Presidio. His blood was aflame with rage, his face was purple with wrath. There remained at the Presidio no more than half a dozen soldiers, for the greater part of the garrison had gone with Sergeant Gonzalez. And of these half a dozen, 4 were on the sick list and 2 were necessarily guards. So Captain Ramon could not send men down to the Vega house in effort to effect capture of the highwaymen. Moreover, he decided that Senor Zorro would not remain there more than a few minutes, but would mount his horse and ride away, for the highwaymen had made a name not resting long in one place. Besides, Captain Ramon had no wish to let it become known that this Senor Zorro had met him a second time, and that he had treated him much like a peon. Could he give out information that he had insulted a senorita, and that Senor Zorro had punished him because of it? That Senor Zorro had caused him to get down upon his knees and apologize, and had kicked him through the front door like a dog? The captain decided it were better to say nothing of this occurrence. He supposed that Senorita Lolita would tell her parents, and that the dispensero would give testimony, but he doubted whether Don Carlos would do anything about it. Don Carlos would think twice before affronting an officer of the armored, being the recipient already of the governor's frowns. Ramon only hoped that Don Diego would not learn much of the happening, for if a Vega raised a hand against him, the captain would have difficulty maintaining his position. Pacing the floor of his office, Captain Ramon allowed his wrath to grow in thought on these things and many others. He had kept abreast of the times, and he knew that the governor and the men about him were sorely in need of more funds to waste in riotous living. They had plucked those men of wealth against whom there was the faintest breath of suspicion, and they would welcome a new victim. Might not the captain suggest one, at the same time strengthen his own position with the governor? Would the captain dare hint that perhaps the Vega family was wavering in its loyalty to the governor? At least he could do one thing, he decided. He could have his revenge for flouting the daughter of Don Carlos Pulido had given him. Captain Ramon grinned despite his wrath as the thought came to him. He called for riding materials and informed one of his men that he should prepare for a journey, being about to be named for a courier's job. Ramon paced the floor for some minutes more, thinking on the matter and trying to decide just how to word the epistle he intended writing. And finally he sat down before the long table and addressed his message to His Excellency the Governor at his mansion in San Francisco de Asís. This is what he wrote. Your intelligences regarding the highwayman, Senor Zorro, as he is known, have come to hand. I regret that I am unable at this writing to report the rogue's capture, but I trust that you will be lenient with me in this matter, since circumstances are somewhat unusual. I have the greater part of my force in pursuit of the fellow, with orders to get him in person or fetch me his corpse. But this Senor Zorro does not fight alone. He is being given succor at certain places in the neighborhood, allowed to remain in hiding when necessary, given food and drink, and no doubt fresh horses. Within the past day he visited the hacienda of Don Carlos Pulido, a caballero known to be hostile to your excellency. I sent men there and went myself. While my soldiers took up his trail, the man came from a closet and living room at Don Carlos' house and attacked me treacherously. He wounded me in the right shoulder, but I fought him off until he became frightened and dashed away, making his escape. I may mention that I was hindered somewhat by this Don Carlos in pursuing the man. Also, when I arrived at the hacienda, indications were that the man had been eating his evening meal there. The Pulido hacienda is an excellent place for such a man to hide, being somewhat off the main highway. I fear that Senor Zorro makes it his headquarters when he's in the vicinity, and I await your instructions in this matter. I may add that Don Carlos scarcely treated me with respect while I was in his presence, and that his daughter, the Senorita Lolita, scarcely could keep from showing her admiration of this highwayman and from sneering at the efforts of the soldiers to capture him. There are also indications of a famous and wealthy family of this neighborhood wavering in loyalty to your excellency, but you will appreciate the fact that I cannot write of such a thing in a massive letter sent to you by a courier. With deep respect, Ramon, Comandante, and Captain Presidio Reina de los Angeles. Ramon grinned again as he finished the letter. The last paragraph, and it would get the governor guessing. The Vega family was about the only famous and wealthy one that would fit the description. As for the Pulidos, Captain Ramon imagined what would happen to them. The governor would not hesitate to deal out punishment, and perhaps the Senorita Lolita would find herself without protection and in no position to reject the advances of a captain of the army. Now Ramon addressed himself to the task of making a second copy of the letter, intending to send one by courier and preserve the other one for his files, in case something came up and he wished to refer to it. Having finished the copy, he folded the original and sealed it, carried it to the soldier's lounging room, and gave it to the man he had selected as courier. The soldier saluted, hurried out to his horse, and rode furiously toward the north, toward San Fernando and Santa Barbara, and on to San Francisco de Asís, with the orders ringing in his ears that he should make all haste to get a change of horses at every mission and pueblo in the name of His Excellency. Ramon returned to his office and poured out a measure of wine and began reading over the copy of the letter. He half wished that he made it stronger, yet he knew that it were better to make it mild, for then the governor would not think he was exaggerating. He stopped reading now and then to curse the name of Senor Zorro, and frequently had reflected on the beauty and grace of Senorita Lolita and told himself that she should be punished for the manner in which she had treated him. He supposed that Senor Zorro was miles away by this time and putting more miles between himself and Reina de los Angeles, but he was mistaken in that, for the curse of Capistrano, as the soldiers called him, had not hurried away after leaving the house of Don Diego Vega. Senor Zorro had gone a short distance through the darkness to where he had left his horse in the rear of a native's hut, and there he had stood, thinking of the love that had come to him. Presently he chuckled, as if well pleased, and mounted and rode slowly toward the path that led to the Presidio. He heard a horseman galloping away from the place, and thought that Captain Ramon had sent a man to call back Sergeant Gonzalez and the troopers and put them on to a fresher trail. Senor Zorro knew how affairs stood in the Presidio, knew to a man how many of the soldiery were there, and that 4 were ill and with fever, and that there was but one well man now besides the captain, since one had ridden away. He laughed again and made his horse climb the slope slowly as to make little noise. In the rear of the Presidio building, he dismounted and allowed the reins to drag on the ground, knowing that the animal would not move from that spot. Now he crept through the darkness to the wall of the building and made his way around it carefully until he came to a window. He raised himself on a pile of adobe bricks and peered inside. It was Captain Ramon's office into which he looked, and he saw the Commandante sitting before a table reading a letter which it appeared he had just finished writing. Captain Ramon was talking to himself, as does many an evil man. "That will cause consternation for the pretty senorita," he was saying. "That will teach her not to flaunt an officer of His Excellency's forces. When her father is in the carcel charged with high treason and his estates have been taken away, then perhaps she'll listen to what I have to say." Senor Zorro had no difficulty in distinguishing the words. He guessed instantly that the Captain Ramon had planned a revenge, that he contemplated mischief towards the Pulidos. Beneath his mask, the face of Senor Zorro grew black with rage. He got down from the pile of adobe bricks and slipped along the wall until he came to the corner of the building. In a socket at the side of the front door, a torch was burning, and the only able-bodied man left in the garrison was pacing back and forth before the doorway, a pistol in his belt and a blade at his side. Senor Zorro noted the length of the man's pacing. He judged the distance accurately, and just as the man turned his back to resume his march, the highwayman sprang. His hands closed around the soldier's throat as his knees struck the man in the back. Instantly they were upon the ground, and the surprised trooper, now doing his best to put up a fight, but Senor Zorro, knowing that a bit of noise might mean disaster for him, silenced the man by striking him on the temple with the heavy butt of his pistol. He pulled the unconscious soldier back into the shadows, gagged him with a strip torn from the end of his serape, and bound his hands and feet with other strips. Then he drew his cloak about him, looked to his pistol, listened a moment to be sure the short fight with the soldier had not attracted attention of any inside the building, and slipped once more toward the door. He was inside in an instant. Before him was the big lounging room with its hard dirt floor. Here were some long tables and bunks and wine mugs and harness and saddles and bridles. Senor Zorro gave it but a glance to assure himself that no man was in there, and walked swiftly and almost silently across to the door that opened into the office of the Commandante. He made sure that his pistol was ready for instant use, and threw the door open boldly. Captain Ramon was seated with his back toward, and now whirled about in his chair with a snarl on his lips, thinking one of his men had entered without preliminary of knocking, and ready to rebuke the man. "Not a sound, senor," the highwayman warned. "You die if as much as a gasp escapes your lips." He kept his eyes on those of the Commandante, closed the door behind him, and advanced in the room. He walked forward slowly without speaking, the pistol held ready in front of him. Captain Ramon had his hands on the table before him, and his face had gone white. "This visit is necessary, senor, I believe," Senor Zorro said. "I have not made it because I admire the beauty of your face." "What do you do here?" the captain asked, disregarding the order to make no sound, yet speaking in a tone scarcely above a whisper. "I happened to look in the window, senor. I saw the epistle before you on the table, and I heard you speak. 'Tis a bad thing for a man to talk to himself. Had you remained silent, I might have gone about my business. As it is—" "Well, senor," the captain asked, with a bit of his old arrogance returning to him, "I have a mind to read the letter before you. Does my military business interest you that much?" "As to that, we shall say nothing, senor. Kindly remove your hands from the table, but do not reach toward the pistol at your side unless you wish to die the death instantly. It would not grieve me to have to send your soul into the hereafter." The Commandante did as he'd been directed, and Senor Zorro went forward cautiously and snatched up the letter, then retreated a few paces, still watching the man before him. "I'm going to read this," he said, "but I warn you that I shall watch you closely also. Do not make a move, senor, unless it is your wish to visit your ancestors." He read swiftly, and when he had finished, he looked the Commandante straight in the eyes for some time without speaking, and his own eyes were glittering malevolently through his mask. Captain Ramon began to feel more uncomfortable. Senor Zorro stepped across to the table, still watching the other, and held the letter to the flame of the candle. It caught fire, blazed, presently dropped it to the floor in a bit of ash. Senor Zorro put one foot upon it. "The letter will not be delivered," he said. "So you fight women, do you, senor? A brave officer and an ornament to His Excellency's forces. I doubt not he would grant you promotion if he knew of this. Your insult, a senorita because of her father, for the time being is not friendly with those in power, and because she repulses you as you deserve, you set about to cause trouble for the members of her family. Truly, it is a worthy deed." He took a step closer and bent forward, still holding the pistol ready before him. "Let me not hear of you sending any letter similar to one I have just destroyed," he said. "I regret at the present time that you are unable to stand before me and cross blades. It would be an insult to my sword to run you through, yet I would do it to rid the world of such a fellow. You speak bold words to a wounded man. No doubt the wound will heal, senor, and I shall keep myself informed regarding it. And when it is healed and you have back your strength, I shall take the trouble to hunt you up and call you to account for what you have attempted doing this night. Let that be understood between us." Again their eyes blazed, each man's into each other's, and Senor Zorro stepped backward and drew his cloak closer about him. To their ears there came suddenly a jangling of a harness, the tramp of horses' feet, and the raucous voice of Sergeant Pedro Gonzalez. "Do not dismount," the sergeant was crying to his men at the door. "I but make a report, and then we go after the rogue. There shall be no rest until we take him." Senor Zorro glanced quickly around the room, for he knew escape by the entrance was cut off now. Captain Ramon's eyes flashed with keen anticipation. "Oh, Gonzalez!" he shrieked before Zorro could warn him against it. "To the rescue, Gonzalo! Senor Zorro is here!" And then he looked at the highwayman defiantly, as if telling him to do his worst, but Senor Zorro had no desire to fire his pistol and let the captain's life's blood. It appeared preferring to save him for the blade when his shoulder would have healed. "Remain where you are," he commanded, and darted toward the nearest window. The big sergeant had heard, however. He called upon his men to follow and rushed across the large room to the door of the office and threw it open. A bellow of rage escaped him as he saw the masked man standing beside the table and saw the Commandante sitting before it with his hands spread out before him. "By the saints, we have him!" Gonzalez cried. "In with you, troopers! Guard the doors! Some look to the windows!" Senor Zorro had transferred his pistol to his left hand and had whipped out his blade. Now he swept it forward and sideways, and the candles were struck from the table. Zorro put his foot upon the only one that remained lighted and extinguished it in that manner, and the room was in total darkness. "Lights! Bring a torch!" Gonzalez shrieked. Senor Zorro sprang aside against the wall and made his way around it rapidly, while Gonzalez and the two other men sprang into the room, and one remained guarding the door, while the other room several ran to get a torch and managed to get in each other's way. The man with the torch came rushing through the door finally and shrieked and went down with a sword blade through his breast, and then the torch fell to the floor and was extinguished. And then, before the sergeant could reach the spot, Senor Zorro was back in the darkness again and could not be found. Gonzalez was roaring his curses now and searching for the man he wished to slay. and the captain was crying to him to be careful and not to put his blade through a trooper by mistake. The other men were storming around in the other room. One came in with a second torch. Zorro's pistol spoke, and the torch was shot from the man's hand. The highwayman sprang forward and stamped upon it, putting it out, and again retreated into the darkness, changing his position rapidly, listening for the deep breathing that would tell him the exact location of his various foes. "Catch the rogue," the Commandante was shrieking. "Can one man thus make fools of the lot of you?" Then he ceased to speak, for Senor Zorro had grasped him from behind and shut off his wind, and now the highwayman's voice rang out above the din. "Soldiers, I have your captain. I'm going to carry him before me and back out the door. I'm going across to the other room and so reach outside of the building. I have discharged one pistol, but I am holding its mate at the base of the captain's brain. And when one of you attacks me, I fire and you are without a captain." The captain could feel the cold steel at the back of his head and shrieked for the men to use caution. Senor Zorro carried him to the doorway and backed out with the captain held in front of him, while Gonzales and the troopers followed as closely as they dared, watching every move, hoping for a chance to catch him unaware. He crossed the big lounging room of the Presidio and so came to the outside door. He was somewhat afraid of the men outside, for he knew that some of them run around the building to guard the windows. The torch was still burning just outside the door, and Senor Zorro put up his hand and tore it down and extinguished it, but still there would be grave danger the moment he stepped out. Gonzales and troopers were before him, spread out fan-fashioned across the room, bending forward, waiting for a chance to get in a blow. Gonzales held the pistol in his hand, though he made out to despise the weapon, and he was watching for an opportunity to shoot without endangering the life of his captain. "Back, senors," the highwayman commanded now. "I would have more room in which to make my start." "That is it. I thank you. Sergeant Gonzales, were not the odds so heavy, I might be tempted to play at fence with you and disarm you again." "By the saints, some other time, my sergeant. And now, senores, attention. It desolates me to say it, but I had only one pistol. What the captain has been feeling all this time is base of his brain is nothing except a bridle buckle I picked up from the floor. Is it not a pretty jest? Senores, adios." Suddenly he whirled the captain forward, darting into the darkness, and started towards his horse with the whole pack at his heels and pistol flashes splitting the darkness of night and bullets whistling by his head. His laughter came back to them on stiffening breeze that blew from distant sea. Senor Zorro urged his horse down the treacherous slope of the hill, where there was loose gravel and a misstep would spell disaster, where the troopers were slow to follow. Sergeant Gonzales possessed courage enough, and some of the men followed him, while others galloped off to the left and to the right, planning to intercept the fugitive when they reached the bottom and turned. Senor Zorro, however, was before them and took the trail toward San Gabriel at furious gallop. When the troopers dashed along behind, calling to one another and now and then discharging a pistol with great waste of powder and ball, with no result so far as capturing or wounding the highwaymen was concerned. Soon the moon came up. Senor Zorro had been anticipating that, knew that it would make his escape more difficult. But his horse was fresh and strong, while those ridden by the troopers had covered many miles during the day, and so hope was not gone. Now he could see plainly by those who pursued, and he could hear Sergeant Gonzales crying upon his men to urge their beasts to the utmost effect and capture. He glanced behind him as he rode and observed that troopers were scattering out in a long line, the stronger and fresher horses gaining on the others. So they rode for some 5 miles, the troopers holding the distance but not making any gains, and Senor Zorro knew that soon their horses would weaken and that the good steed he bestrode, which gave no signs of fatigue yet, would outdistance them. Only one thing bothered them. He wanted to be traveling in the opposite direction. Here the hills rose abruptly on either side of the highway, and it was not possible for him to turn aside and make a great circle, nor were there any trails he could follow, and if he attempted to have his horse climb, they'd have to make slow progress, and the troopers would come near enough to fire their pistols and mayhap wound him. So he rode straight ahead, gaining a bit now, knowing that 2 miles further up the valley there was a trail that swung off to the right, and that by following it he would come to higher ground and so be able to double back on his tracks. He had covered one of the 2 miles before he remembered that it had been noised abroad that a landslide had been caused by the recent torrential rain and had blocked his higher trail, so he could not use that even when he reached it. And now a bold thought came to his mind. As he topped a slight rise in the terrain, he glanced behind him once more and saw that no two of the troopers were riding side by side. They were all scattered, and there was some distance between each two of them. This would help his plan. He dashed around a bend in the highway and pulled up his horse. He turned the animal's head back towards whence he had come, and bent forward in the saddle to listen. When he could hear the hoofbeats of the nearest pursuer's horse, he drew his blade and took a turn of the reins around his left wrist, and suddenly struck his beast in the flanks cruelly with his sharp rowels. The animal he rode was not used to such treatment, never having felt the spurs except when in a gallop, and his master wished greater speed. Now he sprang forward like a thunderbolt, dashed around the curve like a wild stallion, and bore down upon the nearest of Senor Zorro's foes. "Make way, Zorro!" cried out. The first man gave ground readily, not sure that this was the highwayman coming back, and when he was sure of it he shrieked the intelligence to those behind, but they could not understand because of the clatter of hooves on the hard road. Senor Zorro bore down upon the second man, clashed swords with him, and rode on. He clashed and dashed around another curve, and his horse struck another fairly and hurled him from the roadway. Zorro swung at the fourth man and missed him, and he was glad that the fellow's counterstroke missed as well. And now there was naught but the straight ribbon of road before him, his galloping foes dotting it. Like a maniac he rode them through, cutting and slashing at them as he passed. Sergeant Gonzalez, far in the rear because of his jaded mount, realized that this was taking place and screeched at his men, and even as he screeched, a thunderbolt seemed to strike his horse, unseating him. And then Senor Zorro was through them and gone, and they were following him again and cursing Sergeant at their head, but a distance slightly greater than before. He allowed his horse to go somewhat slower now, since he could keep his distance, and rode to the first cross trail on which he turned. He took to the higher ground and looked back to see the pursuit streaming out over the hill, losing itself in the distance, but still determined. "It was an excellent trick," Senor Zorro said to his horse, "but we cannot try that often." He passed the hacienda of a man friendly to the governor, and thought came to him. Gonzalez might stop there and obtain fresh horses for himself and his men. Nor was he mistaken in that. The troopers dashed up the driveway, and dogs howled at the welcome. The master of the hacienda came to the door, holding a candelero high above his head. "We chase Senor Zorro," Gonzalez cried. "We require fresh steeds in the name of the governor." The servants were called, and Gonzalez and his men hurried to the corral. Magnificent horses were there, horses almost as good as the one the highwayman rode, and all of them were fresh. The troopers quickly stripped the saddles and bridles from their jaded mounts and put them on the fresh steeds, and then dashed for the trail again and took up pursuit. Senor Zorro had gained quite a lead, but there was only one trail he could follow, and they might overtake him. 3 miles away on the crest of a small hill there was a hacienda that had been presented to the mission of San Gabriel by the caballero who had died without leaving heirs. The governor had threatened to take it for the state, but so far had not done so. the Franciscans of San Gabriel having a name for protecting their property with determination. In charge of this hacienda was one Fray Felipe, a member of the order who was along in years, and under his direction the neophytes made the estate a profitable one, raising much livestock and sending it to storehouses, great amounts of hides and tallow and honey and fruit as well, and obviously wine. Gonzalez knew the trail they were following led to this hacienda, and that just beyond it there was another trail that split, one part going to San Gabriel and the other returning to Reina de los Angeles by a longer route. If Senor Zorro passed the hacienda, it stood reason that he would take the trail that ran toward the pueblo, since, had he wished to go to San Gabriel, he would have continued along the highway in the first place, instead of turning and riding back to the troopers at some risk to himself. But he doubted whether Zorro would pass, for it was well known that highwaymen dealt harshly with those who prosecuted the frailes, and it was to believe that every Franciscan held a friendly feeling for him and would give him aid. The troopers came within sight of the hacienda and could see no light. Gonzalez stopped them where the driveway started and listened in vain for sounds of the man they pursued. He dismounted and inspected the dusty road, but could not tell where the horseman had ridden toward the house recently. He issued quick orders, and the troop separated, half the men remaining with the sergeant and the others scattering in such a manner they could surround the house and search the huts of the natives and look at the great barns. Then Sergeant Gonzalez rode straight up the driveway with half of his men at his back, forced his horse up the steps to the veranda as a sign that he held this place in little respect, and knocked on the door with the hilt of his sword. Presently light showed through the windows, and after a time the door was thrown open. Fray Felipe stood framed in it, shading a candle with his hand, a giant of a man, past 60, but one who had been a power in his time. "What is all this noise?" he demanded in his deep voice, "and why do you, son of evil, ride your horse on my veranda?" "We're chasing this pretty Senor Zorro, Fray. This man they call the curse of Capistranos," Gonzalez said. "And you expect to find him in this poorhouse? Stranger things have answered. Answer me, Fray. Have you heard a horseman gallop past within a short time?" "I have not." "And has the Senor Zorro paid you a visit recently?" "I do not know the man you mean." "You have heard of him, doubtless." "I have heard that he seeks to aid the oppressed, that he has punished those who have committed sacrilege, and that he has whipped those brutes who have beaten Indians." "You are bold in your words, Fray." "It's my nature to speak the truth, soldier. You'll be getting yourself into difficulties with the powers, my robed Franciscan." "I fear no politician, soldier." "I do not like the tone of your words, Fray. I have half a mind to dismount and give you a taste of my whip." "Senor," Fray Felipe cried, "take 10 years off my shoulders, and I can drag you in the dirt." "That is a question for dispute. However, let us get to the subject of this visit. You have not seen a masked fiend who goes by the name of Senor Zorro?" "I have not, soldier." "I shall have my men search your house." "You accuse me of falsehood?" Fray Felipe cried. "My men must do something to pass the time, and they may as well search your house. You have nothing you wish to hide?" "Recognizing the identity of my guests, it might well be to hide the wine jugs," Fray Felipe said. Sergeant Gonzalez allowed an oath to escape him and got down from his horse. The others dismounted too, and the sergeant's mount was taken off the veranda and left with the horse holder. Then Gonzalez drew off his glove, sheathed his sword, and stamped through the door with the others at his heels as Fray Felipe fell back before him, protesting against the intrusion. From a couch in the far corner of the room arose a man who stepped into the circle of light by the candelero. As I have eyes, it is my raucous friend, he cried. Don Diego, you're here? Gonzalez gasped. I've been at my hacienda looking over business affair, and I rode over to spend the night with Fray Felipe, who has known me from babyhood. These turbulent times, I thought that here, at least, in this hacienda, is a bit out of the way, and as a friar in charge of it, I could spend for a little time and rest in peace without hearing the violence and bloodshed. But it appears that I cannot. Is there no place in this country where a man can meditate and consult musicians and poets? Meal mush and goat's milk, Gonzalez cried. Don Diego, you're my good friend and a true caballero. Tell me, have you seen this Senor Zorro tonight? I have not, Sergeant. You did not hear him ride past the hacienda? I did not. But a man could ride past and not be heard here in the house. Fray Felipe and I have been talking together, and we're just about to retire when you came. Then the rogue has ridden on and taken the trail toward the pueblo, the sergeant declared. You had him in view? Don Diego asked. Ha! We were on his heels, caballero. But at a turn in the high road he made a connection with some 20 men of his band. They rode at us and attempted to scatter us, but we drove them aside and kept after Senor Zorro. We managed to separate him from his fellows and give chase. You say he has a score of men. Fully a score. As my men will testify, he's a thorn in the flesh of soldiery, but I have sworn to get him, and when once we stand face to face, you'll tell me of it afterward, Don Diego asked, rubbing his hands together. You relate how you mocked him as he fought, how you played with him, pressed him back, and ran him through. By the saints, you make mock of me, caballero. 'Tis but a jest, my sergeant. Now that we understand each other, perhaps Fray Felipe will give wine to you and your men. After such a chase you must be fatigued. Wine would taste good, the sergeant said. His corporal came in then to report the huts and barns had been searched, and the corral also, and there's no trace had been found of Senor Zorro or his horse. Fray Felipe served the wine, though he appeared to do it with some reluctance, and it was plain that he was but answering Don Diego's request. And what shall you do now, my sergeant? Don Diego asked, after the wine had been brought to the table. Are you always going to go chasing around the country and creating tumult? The rogue evidently has turned back toward Reina de Los Angeles, caballero, the sergeant replied. He thinks he's clever, no doubt, but I can understand his plan. Ah, and what is that? He will ride around Reina de Los Angeles and take the trail to San Luis Rey. He will rest for a time, no doubt, to throw off pursuit, and then will continue to the vicinity of San Juan Capistrano. That is where he began this wild life, and for that reason the curse of Capistrano he is called. Yes, he will go to Capistrano. And the soldiers? Don Diego asked. We shall follow him leisurely. We shall work toward the place, and when news of his next outrage is made known, we shall, within a short distance of him, instead of in the presidio at the pueblo, we can find the fresh trail and so take up the chase. There shall be no rest for us until the rogue is either slain or taken prisoner. And you have the reward, Don Diego added. You speak true words, caballero. The reward will come in handy, but I seek revenge also. The rogue disarmed me once. Ah, that was the time he held the pistol in your face and forced you to fight. Too well. That was the time, my good friend. Oh, I have a score to settle with him. Ah, these turbulent times, Don Diego sighed. I wish they were at an end. A man has no chance for meditation. There are moments when I think I shall ride far out in the hills where there can be found no life except rattlesnakes and coyotes, and there spend a number of days. Only in that manner may a man meditate. Why meditate? Gonzalez cried. Why not cease thought and take to action? What a man you would make, caballero, if you let your eye flash now and then and quarreled a little bit and showed your teeth once in a while. What you need is a few bitter enemies. May the saints preserve us, Don Diego cried. It is truth, caballero. Fight a bit, make love to some senorita, get drunk, wake up and be a man. Upon my soul, you almost persuade me, Sergeant, but no, I could never endure the exertion. Gonzalez growled something into his great mustache and then got up from the table. I have no special liking for you, Fray, but I thank you for your wine, which was excellent, he said. We must continue our journey. A soldier's duty never is at an end while he lives. Do not speak of journeys, Don Diego cried. I must take one myself on the morrow. My business at the hacienda is done, and I go back to the pueblo. Let me express the hope, my good friend, that you survived the hardship, Sergeant Gonzalez said.